in 2020, after many years of grueling effort producing this film, and then we show up to Netflix, who had purchased the film, and when we turned in our edit to them, we had gone so deep in certain ways and the angle that we were taking, they even got a little nervous about it, and we went back and forth with them on how to make the film, and even allowed them to make the adjustments that they thought needed to be made, and made the hardest decision probably I've ever had to make, which was stepping away from that contract.
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe De Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world.
Today's episode of The Hard Way with Joe De Sena is sponsored by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer, and the official non-alcoholic beer of Spartan. Now you can drink great tasting brews all night long and wake up race ready without the hangover. Athletic is the most decorated non-alcoholic brewer in the world, with over 70 awards for its wide selection of IPAs, Goldens, light brews, and more. Athletic Brewing's near beers are fit for all times, which means you can drink them anytime, anywhere. From now until December 31st, new Athletic customers can receive 20% off their first order of $50 or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code HARDWAY at checkout. That's HARDWAY, all one word, for 20% off your first order of TWO 6-packs or more at athleticbrewing.com.
Joe De Sena here, CEO and founder of Spartan and the Hard Way podcast. I got a special one for you today. I've got Kameron Waters, this guy, gospel singer, drummer, just overall performer, superhuman, now director. And I don't know, somebody you'd want to hang out with. He's in Atlanta, Georgia. He comes from the place where the Masters is played in golf, yes?
That's right. Home of the Masters and James Brown.
And James Brown. So you must be a good guy. How did you become a performer in a church? How did this happen?
Well, that's a long story. So I guess backing up, I was born in Augusta, Georgia, like you said, and I was born straight into your traditional fundamentalist Southern Baptist Bible Belt family. And I was born to a 16-year-old mother. At the time, that was quite the rebellious thing that happened within the community in the circle that she's in. But she and I are best of friends, and she's an amazing gospel singer, worship leader in churches, etc. And then her dad, my grandfather, he's the guy that baptized me into the church and everything. And he was the music minister. He's a Baptist music minister. So it just ran in the family. Besides them, everyone else in my family is involved in that. So I guess around the time I was about 17 years old is when I really stepped into that calling for myself. And I joined my first touring worship band, a Christian like gospel band. I was obviously into all kinds of music as well, but I got this opportunity to audition for this band. I made the part as a drummer. That's where most of my passion in music comes from, is really my love for drums. And anyhow, got accepted to this band, started touring at 17. That lasted until I was about 20 years old. Between Augusta and Nashville, I was like working that kind of circuit all around the Southeast, toured with Lifeway Christian bookstores, camps that they did, all these different, really in the bubble of the fundamentalist Christian kind of sphere for quite a while. Then when I moved to Los Angeles in 2010, I joined a church called Mosaic, which is like right in the center of Hollywood, kind of like a celebrity-esque pastor runs it. He writes all these books. I had read one of his books as a youth and found him very fascinating. You would find him fascinating too, honestly. His book that I read when I was younger was called The Barbarian Way. So it was all about like hardness, masculinity, but within the, spectrum of Christian spirituality. So I joined his church, and like I said, it was right in the heart of Hollywood. It was a mobile church at the time, meeting at the Mayan nightclub, which is like a notoriously dirty, grungy, definitely not faith-based space, but we would set up church there. We would play. It was kind of like a rock concert meets church. And then we ended up getting a building in Hollywood, right on the Hollywood Boulevard, right by the stars and everything. And once we got there, we hunkered down and started to produce our own music as a community, and got signed to Sony Records with some of our songs. Myself and a few others in the group wrote most of the songs on this live record. We performed it at the Wiltern. Went on to open for many other, acts with that band, but then also crossover and played with some other Christian crossover bands on Interscope Records, and toured a bunch in the van with, that lifestyle. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then ultimately led me to kind of a critical point, which has led me to where I am now back in 2015. Yeah.
How do you have that kind of life where you're touring and signing record deals and checking out big LA mansions and seeing the stars and the sidewalk, and not get caught up in it where you want to start drinking and partying and being a rock star? How do you not get caught up in it?
It's a great question. I mean, all of the temptations are definitely there. But I think that's the power that I will give and honor that community for, that I stepped into, called Mosaic, when I got to Hollywood, is, no community's perfect. No, I guess, line of spirituality is devoid from human failures and flaws and all the things that come with people coming together. But, despite the challenges that arose with some of my background in those spaces, what I do hold dear to my heart is that it's such a profound way to land into a place like LA, because you're just surrounded by other people that in the depths of their heart, they're trying to do good. And so through that opportunity of knowing all those people, that's how I got a lot of my gigs, honestly, as a musician and as a gospel musician, is through that community and that network that I built. And so everybody's kind of, holding each other accountable, trying to keep each other above that stuff. So yeah, definitely was lucky in that sense.
No slippage?
Well, I mean, I had moments of, a little bit of exploration in my early 20s with things like, there was one moment where I smoked some weed one time or something like that. And it was my first time I'd ever done it. And I totally had a panic attack, and it was not good. Didn't go back to it or whatever, because it's legal in California, the whole thing. But other than that, no, I mean, living a pretty, I would say, borderline monastic type lifestyle, heavily focused on channeling the best songs possible, performing, leading others into, God's presence, I guess, through celebration and singing. So definitely tried my best to stay on the path.
Did the writings of the songs, I would imagine, you and I are just meeting for the first time, so it's not like I know the music, but I'm just making an assumption. You're playing these songs over and over and over. You're starting to internalize the verbiage. Does that help you live that kind of life? When I think the reason I'm going down this road is I'm asking Spartans around the world to live a different life. My mother, in the 1970s, in a neighborhood that was riddled with organized crime. If you saw the movie Goodfellas, that's where I grew up. My mother found yoga, meditation, health food. She became vegan. It was pretty rare. And so I although it wasn't a Christian community where we were singing and there's some similarities there. And so I'm asking this global Spartan community to live a higher life. So that's why I'm interested, right? Was it the music maybe was part of it too? Not only the accountability factor?
Absolutely, the music. Yeah, there's something really powerful about the frequency of human voices coming together, even above, say, the instruments. The instruments are powerful, but that collective of human voices, we would have thousands of people singing together. And I can't even begin to describe to you the moments that I had from behind the drum set, even from back there, being able to hear a sea of voices singing these really powerful, affirming words, and even if someone who isn't a person of faith particularly has their questions about the Bible or this or that, the words that are spoken typically in these songs, they're very poetic. It's poetry. It can apply to you no matter what your background is. So for sure, it's like these massive positive affirmations that everyone's collectively agreeing on in a moment. So that definitely played a huge part.
Does the opposite happen? Now that you're saying that, I'm thinking about in the wrestling room with my boys. It's 100 degrees in the room. They're working their butts off. They're 2 or 3 hours into a workout, second workout of the day, and coach is putting on some rap. And the words are the antithesis of what I suspect you're talking about. Do you think that has an opposite effect on culture, society?
Man, I would, in my younger days, kind of laugh or scoff at people that thought that words could affect people that much. I remember it's kind of like the grandparents saying video games are warping your mind or whatever. But, now as a 35-year-old and living some life, I definitely feel that plays a huge part. I recently it's a pretty emotional thing. I'll try to stay together on it, but I recently lost my brother to gang violence. And I feel that, the music really plays a part in the mindset that's going on in those communities. It's also their outlet to express and often express violence towards each other with words that then manifests itself in reality. So yes, absolutely. I think there's kind of different frequency bands that these types of ideas are on, depending on what musical spectrum you're listening to. And I feel you want to be flooding yourself with something that's pulling you upward as opposed to downward into the vices, So for sure.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you and I grew up, just thinking about where I grew up in the neighborhood where guys killed people for a living, it was a badge of honor to go to jail. If you're a young person like I was, you don't know how would you know any different? That's what you aspire to be. If the people around me were marathon runners and they had really fancy cars and houses because they won marathon, then that's what you would aspire to be. Right. So whether it's a movie, whether it's real life around you, whether it's music, I'm sure people listening would say, well, that's ridiculous. Like we can't, we don't want to control the music, whatever, but young people are pretty impressionable. And anyway, I won't go down too much of that rabbit hole. This whole journey has led you, before we get to where it led you, one thing everybody should understand that's listening or watching, and tell me if you agree with this, is if you're stuck, and most people are stuck in life, but if you're stuck, you got to get out and do something. You were doing something. You got sucked up into this life. You ended up in LA, and rather than just sitting on the couch and waiting to see a lightning bolt hit you and tell you what you're supposed to do in your life, and boom, because you were doing things, you ended up directing a movie or co-directing a movie. Tell us about the movie.
Yeah, so I guess I should speak to the transition getting out of the gospel music career and into the movie, which is a big part of how it started. And essentially what happened is along the journey of getting really deep into that career, one of the things that I did to hold me together, and I think just like keep my connection to my highest ideal self, is I started practicing what's called the Daniel fast every year. And it's become more and more popular over the years. When I started it back in 2007, it was like a really kind of fringe thing within more Protestant culture, Christianity. But then Rick Warren, the kind of celebrity pastor, he's on the Oprah Book Club and everything. He's one of the really, really big guy pastors. He started this thing called the Daniel Plan, which essentially he was quite overweight, this pastor, and his community was suffering with obesity. And he's like, we got to do something about this. So he called upon this scripture in the Old Testament from the prophet Daniel, where he kind of like consecrated himself to God amidst the oppression of slavery by King Nebuchadnezzar. He had been captured as a Hebrew and taken into Babylon, right? And while he's there, the king's trying to feed him, all of this choice food, the meats, wines, and everything, because the type of slave that he was there because he was adept in his knowledge. If someone showed superior, skills in their ability to think, they wouldn't send them out to work, labor jobs. They would try to get them to study and just build the knowledge of the kingdom, right? So he was getting flooded with all of this fancy food. And he told, the overseers in the court, I don't want to eat that. Please, I refuse to eat those choice foods and the wine, particularly the meat. And it says that he lived on only vegetables and water. The kingdom and the people that were overseeing him got really, really mad and said like, hey, our neck's on the line. If you get sick or if something happens to you, Nebuchadnezzar's coming after me. We can't have that. You got to do this. And so he said, just give me 10 days, myself and my brothers, and test us against anyone in the kingdom. We'll do our way. You guys do the king's way. And so after 10 days, they tested healthier, stronger, and wiser than everyone else. That was then turned into this program by this celebrity pastor, right, called the Daniel Plan, where you do follow that diet, or you're supposed to. Not everyone does, but you restrict your diet down to fruits, veggies, natural, whole foods, plant-based. And there's a spiritual component, getting into scripture, getting into community, moving your body, these kind of things. So I would participate in that every single year.
Today's episode of The Hard Way with Joe De Sena is sponsored by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer, and the official non-alcoholic beer of Spartan. Now you can drink great tasting brews all night long and wake up race ready without the hangover. Athletic is the most decorated non-alcoholic brewer in the world, with over 70 awards for its wide selection of IPAs, Goldens, light brews, and more. Athletic Brewing's near beers are fit for all times, which means you can drink them anytime, anywhere. From now until December 31st, new Athletic customers can receive 20% off their first order of $50 or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code HARDWAY at checkout. That's HARDWAY, all one word, for 20% off your first order of TWO 6-packs or more at athleticbrewing.com.
So walk us through a very simplistic Daniel plan. How long is it, and what are we doing each day?
Right. So it varies. Some people only do it 10 days. A lot of people do it 21 days. Myself and a few of my family members that used to kind of do it together with accountability, we would do 21 days. And yeah, a typical day is, you're eating two, depending on your lifestyle, 2 to 3 meals, whole foods, plant-based. I was eating a lot of smoothies, starchy vegetables in the evening to kind of, give me that satiating feeling, et cetera. To be honest, back in 2007, when I started it, I didn't do it as healthy as I could now, knowing what I know, but I was doing my best. And then you get in some scripture, you read a selection of scripture throughout the day. And then you get outside somehow. At the time when I started, I was just coming out of high school. So getting outside wasn't hard for me to do. I was always active in mountain biking. And, once I got into LA, I was surfing and these kind of things. But then essentially what happened is one year back around 2009 to 2010, going into that new year, I started the Daniel fast. And at the end of it, coming up on my 21st day, I was like, why am I gonna stop this? Like, I felt so good. I felt so tapped in, so aligned. My body felt good. My mind felt so clear. Speaking into the terms of like creativity, writing music and whatnot, I just remember ideas were flowing so easy. So essentially, I just made the decision to not stop. And I kept going for a while, and basically entered what I didn't even know at the time was like a vegetarian diet for a while, pescatarian, flexed in and out until finally, by 2011, late 2010 into 2011, I was like a full plant-based diet. And yeah, once I did that, because I connected it to that scripture, it caused me to look more deeply into my faith tradition, specifically around food. And like, why is this verse in this story here when I've been taught to eat the other way my whole life? Church barbecues. I was a part of a Christian hunting and fishing club, Christmas turkey celebrating Jesus's birthday birthday. And then here's this verse just tucked in there. So it caused me to say, like, is there anything else in the Bible about this? So I started looking into the Bible for all these other clues, ended up finding quite a bit. And then when I was out with my peers in the gospel music scene, we're going out to dinner after a worship set, or we're having a rehearsal and we are ordering something in, whatever it is, I'm always like eating different than everyone. And I was pretty quiet about it, but people are seeing what I'm doing and they're asking me questions like, what's up with that? Why are you eating that way? And so I would always immediately bring it back to the spiritual, creative connection more than anything, because I didn't know anything about the health. I didn't know anything about any ethical concerns around animal foods, none of that. I was just doing it for the spiritual connection. And when I said that to my peers, it just raised an eyebrow. They're like, wait, what do you mean a spiritual connection? And I would go deeper. I'd say, well, I looked at this in the Bible and I looked at this and I know it says this, but it also says this. And it would be really quickly like, whoa, like, let's not go down that road because it doesn't, that's not what you're kind of getting a little lost in all that. And me being a little bit of a rebellious spirit, when someone tells me not to do something in certain ways, I definitely want to go farther, especially when it comes to something so innocent as that, just asking questions, So just started asking more questions. And that led me to eventually realize, wow, I'm not fully aligning with everyone around me right now. And though I have love for everyone, I'm getting pulled. My soul is getting pulled somewhere in a different direction. And around that time, the touring life was wearing on me a bit too, being in the vans all across the country, playing shows in towns I would never otherwise visit if I, And so this one year, 2014, 2015 era, I basically decided to step back from it all. And I bought a Volkswagen Vanagon I found on Craigslist for $1,200. It was a junker about to fall apart, but I said, I'm going to get rid of my little apartment that I was renting in LA. I'm going to move into this thing. I was really into surfing and interested in surfing at the time. I'm going to commit myself to surfing and I'm going to see what's next and just keep diving down this rabbit hole. Along that journey, I picked up a camera, started filming and photographing, scenery and things as I was doing the van life, as they call it now. And I did that for like 4 or 5 years. And towards the end of that journey is when I was really deep down the investigation on this spiritual side of what we eat and how animals come into the equation and everything. And that was when I, along the journey, had seen some of these other films, like my co-director, Kip Anderson, has made really, really powerful films, Cowspiracy, What the Health at the time. He was about to release What the Health. And I came across him at a festival where he was doing a Q&A for Cowspiracy. And at that Q&A, I basically approached him with some, confronting questions that I had been raised through my study. And next thing you know, we're in an hour-long conversation. He's about to miss his flight. He has to jump in my van, my little Vanagon with me, to drive him to the airport. On the way there, we're just like, oh my gosh, we have to make a film out of this.
So give me an example of one of those questions and that conversation you had with this, I guess, famous director, right? These movies have been pretty damn big movies.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say the central focus, there's a lot of nuance to it, but the one really zinger question is, did Jesus eat animals? Here's this prophet that refused it, by Daniel. I went back in time and realized that these other patriarchs in the Bible, Noah, Adam, and the story of the Garden of Eden, it's clear that they're vegan, vegetarian, plant-based type lifestyles happening. And that's unanimously agreed upon by even the most fundamentalist Christians. But then all of a sudden, everything changes based off of some of the narratives in the Bible and some of the scriptures that are there. But yet here we go, and we have this guy, Christ, Jesus, that comes into the story. And it's where we get the name Christianity. So what did he do? We know what these guys experimented with that. We know there's a lot of other people on the other side of the spectrum too throughout the scripture, but what did Jesus do? So my question was, did Jesus eat animals? And, there's stories about fishing, there's these different things that came up, but then the core central question is, well, if he did, which a lot of people thought that he did, and, think that he does or did, and But if he did, then how did he kill them? How would he kill them? So it became very quickly like an ethical question because, following Christ, it's all about living the highest life that you can in service to others and in compassion and kindness, altruism, the virtues. So I'm like thinking, if it says thou shalt not kill in the scripture, that's one of the main tenets. How did Jesus kill an animal? And that was the question that really struck the chord between Kip and I. And that single question was an explosive, like transcendent almost thing that just catapulted us into a worldwide journey through, you name the country, you name the religious tradition, because though it's a deep question for Christianity, it also spans all religions. What does every religion say? When you look in religions, even some of the most dominant ones, like, Hinduism is still a pretty big religion. There's an entire swath of people in the East that are in that, and they're predominantly vegetarian. They refuse meat specifically. Where does that come from? What are these traditions based on? And what is the tradition based on that's more Western, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, that's very, very heavy animal based? Where did that come from? So that's the journey we went on and made a film about it.
Do you answer the questions pretty succinctly by the end? The viewer has answers to these questions, or is it open? I don't want to take anything away from the movie. I want people to watch it, but.
Right. Well, we definitely don't want to do any spoilers, but to your point, yeah, we ask really good questions, I feel. We leave the answers open-ended. We do have interviewees that have said some very, very provocative and powerful things. We've also uncovered, people think religion is so subjective, and of course, there's so much of it that is, but there's a lot written down in text that you can really go into. And when it comes to religion, especially Christianity, you've got texts that have been translated from text, that have been translated from text, that have been translated from text, right? And so you kind of have to go down this rabbit hole to what's the source code on this, statement, really. And that's kind of what we do in the film, is we go deep into that to really understand what the original basis of claims were with the founders of these, movements. And it's massive. I'll say, it's got to be, I think, one of the biggest cover-ups in the last 2,000 years that we end up exposing, based in literal, physical, text-based, translations. So
I spent some time with Dr. Colin Campbell. That name's probably come up in your journey.
Right.
He wrote the China study.
Right.
And when I sat with him, he told me, and again, I come from a family that ate a lot of meat and cannolis and raviolis and all kinds of crappy foods, and they smoked cigarettes, and cigars. But then Mom found her, went on her journey and found vegan lifestyle, etc. Whenever I post anything about being more vegan and leaning that way, you get, half the crowd goes nuts. I've landed with just, eat more salad. How's that? Just eat more salad, because I don't want to fight with everybody. But
well, interestingly, if I can stop you on that, when we got connected and I saw the Spartan connection, which I have some questions around that, super fascinated, and I got to do one. I have to do one of these.
100%. Right? And you and all your friends and all your old musician buddies and anybody, it's on me. Just rally the troops, get a bunch of names, put them in a spreadsheet, let me know. And, whether it's a Spartan or Tough Mudder, I promise you it'll be as rewarding, as exciting as making the movie or traveling around in the van for 5 years or playing the best venue you ever played. Like, it's just so unbelievable because of the Daniel plan that you described, because you're outside, you're dirty, you're breathing heavy, you're sweating. Like, it's just unbelievable.
Awesome. Well, interestingly, when I was kind of just looking into what you were doing, and I kind of got my interest piqued because I'm a big fan of, these Spartans. I loved 300 when it came out. That came out when I was in high school, and I was just charging, with that youthful male energy. And me and all my, homies were just stoked on that movie. And then I was reminded recently, knowing that I was coming to have this conversation, that, the Spartans in Greece, there's a lot of connection with Stoicism. The Stoics were, counterparts to the Pythagoreans, this whole movement that was happening of philosophy that matches that lifestyle. And honestly, there's a lot of similar questions that were happening at that time as the questions that we're asking in this film. Very, very powerful questions around what we eat, because honestly, when it comes to Stoicism and when it comes to what these types of races are about, it's about discipline. It's about honoring, what discipline can do for your life, for your mind, for your spirit. And the Stoics always said, so much of that starts on the plate and starts with what you're putting in your mouth. There's a lot to be learned there. And so I was like, man, that's a cool topic to even talk about. And then I said, well, what did the Spartans eat? Was there anything on their diet? And I went to look, and before I could even find the actual historical Spartan, I found the Spartan race plan that's very similar to like a Daniel Plan-esque pathway, where it has tiered levels, where you're eating your standard diet, but then over time you go to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. And I was surprised to find that not only does it go to plant-based whole foods, there's like another stage that goes, as raw food as you possibly can, which I've had my own journey with that as well. And I found that really, really cool.
Today's episode of The Hard Way with Joe De Sena is sponsored by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer, and the official non-alcoholic beer of Spartan. Now you can drink great tasting brews all night long and wake up race ready without the hangover. Athletic is the most decorated non-alcoholic brewer in the world, with over 70 awards for its wide selection of IPAs, Goldens, light brews, and more. Athletic Brewing's near beers are fit for all times, which means you can drink them anytime, anywhere. From now until December 31st, new Athletic customers can receive 20% off their first order of $50 or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code HARDWAY at checkout. That's HARDWAY, all one word, for 20% off your first order of TWO 6-packs or more at athleticbrewing.com.
I push that, but I do want to meet people where they are. You're not going to snap. Like when Dr. Colin Campbell wrote the China study, he said to me, he thought he proved conclusively without a shadow of a doubt that it's just healthier to eat more plant-based. And he thought everybody, once they read the book and they saw the science, they would just drop all the turkey and the burger, but it didn't happen at all.
Right.
And he even referenced back in the 1920s, there was a Yale professor that did a bunch of work and studies and found conclusively without a shadow of a doubt that the athletes and military men and women performed better than those that were eating animal protein. But that book got put on a shelf and collected dust for 80 years. No one cared about it because it just didn't match what people wanted to do, which is the same reason when on social media, if I said eat more salad, I'm going to get 50% of people going nuts. So, and by the way, I'll eat meat. I eat meat. I'd rather not, but it slips in there. And so I just got done eating a big bowl. I love cucumber salad. If I was stuck on an island for the rest of my life, it'd be cucumbers, red onions, black olives, a little bit of dill, apple cider vinegar, and olive oil. That's I could eat that the rest of my life with a shovel.
I gotcha. Sounds good.
And I've performed incredibly well on ridiculously long endurance events on raw plants. But as many of my buddies, Dr. Fred Bishi, I don't know if that name rings a bell. He's about 95. For 55 years, he's only eaten raw fruits and vegetables. As he says, raw fruits and vegetables do not build biceps. If you want big bicep, you could have the biggest biceps in the cemetery by eating lots of animal protein.
Well, there's a lot of, again, my co-director, he made Cowspiracy and then What the Health, which goes into the actual health side of everything. And there's been, some other powerful films as well, game changers, namely, that comes to mind around this particular topic, the actual topic of performance and what comes into play with that. And I think there's, everybody's going to have their perspective and what they're going to lean into. But I definitely think I like to see even a guy like you who founded Spartan and understands and is in that same realm of the, Joe Rogans of the world and those kind of things, that you're so open to it and still curious about it. Whereas I can see a polarization happening where it's like people have to swing to the left or the right of the spectrum on it. And so many people are going so hardcore, like, that basically you're going to be anemic or sick, or you're not no performance if you're eliminating those foods from your diet.
Listen, my mother and her sister completely switched in the 70s. My nephew has not had a piece of meat or piece of animal protein his entire life. He's strong as an ox. He's a wrestler. Wow. So there's plenty of stories like that. It depends what you want. I have a good friend who's getting a complete stem cell transplant today, literally today while I'm talking to you. And him and I have been fighting for 5 years because he was eating at Hooters and he was eating a lot of crappy foods, and the foods have nothing to do with it. He's getting a stem cell transplant today. So who knows? Maybe it was genetic, but my guess is that the Swedish fish, bags of Swedish fish are not healthy. The Hooters wings are not healthy. I tell everybody, just eat more salad.
Yeah, there you go. Salad and fruit. I think fruits, especially for performance, I saw a funny video recently. It's like becoming a meme about a guy, eating bananas for potassium for the cramps, and everything. But that's what I find. What I consume on a regular basis more than anything is really awesome smoothies throughout the day, because of the lightness and the uptake of those carbs and fruit. Just like, man, it just gives me so much zing, whether I'm doing something intense, moving my body, or whether I'm sitting, at the computer working and trying to make sure that I'm not getting zonked out looking at a screen. And then at night, definitely leaning into the heavier foods. But I hear you. I feel great on it. And I'm curious, like, in your experience, you shared a little bit, but do you have any more, like, it's anecdotal, but I'm just curious, like, some experiences you had doing some of these intense endurance?
I did crazy races, like the Iditarod by foot across Alaska.
Oh, wow.
Bad water, 135 miles through the desert. I think it was 132, 133 degrees that week when we did it. My shirt melted, my shoes melted. That same week I did the Vermont 100 and an Ironman in Lake Placid. Most of those crazy races I did primarily on raw fruits and vegetables, which is ridiculous because you're carrying your own stuff and the calorie to weight ratio does not make sense, but it worked. I don't know. I was drinking olive oil in one race. I mean, it sounds crazy, but like, I don't know.
I imagine it helped with inflammation. Like, you got to get inflamed running that long, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can't really measure that, but I just know that I've always felt better, lighter, faster on clean food. I think one thing anybody listening, watching we could all agree on, is get rid of the processed food where you can. If you can remove it completely from your diet, that'd be great. I would imagine throughout history, no matter what religion you follow, if you and I were living someplace where there were no plants and we just only had access to some meat, we got to survive. So we're not eating sand. So, we're eating what we can. So there were, I'm sure, and there still are situations where you eat. Look, I was in Fiji, the inner island of Fiji, in the jungle for 14 days. And I was in places and villages where those people had never seen a car or a TV or ever been out. And I looked at their physiques. The men and women, they look like magazine cover models. They're ripped, wow. Beautiful people. They're some of the best rugby players in the world, monsters. They barely eat any meat, once a quarter. My understanding is it's mostly vegetables, mostly fruits and vegetables that they grow on their farms. And then once a quarter, a village might kill a cow. and then they eat everything, the eyeballs, the tongue, that like everything they can. But 90% of their diet was veggies. And these human beings were exactly what you wanted to look like.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess to just highlight another aspect, or the main aspect of this upcoming film, the first film looked into environment and environmental impacts of what we consume. What the Health was more on the health side. Seaspiracy specifically focused on the oceans and the fishing industry. But this film really truly is the ethical side of it. And so while I've had my own personal journey, because I do like to move, surf, like I said, mainly fitness. I've always been into calisthenics and these types of things. But a lot of it comes down to as well what the ethical impacts are in what we do. And, I know it's a hard thing to make or base your choices on sometimes in this world, when everything's so packaged and at your door and you don't see what goes behind it and this and that. And that goes across the board for many types of foods. But specifically, this film goes deep on the impacts of these animal foods and questions from like I said, spiritual, religious, philosophical, sociological, what it does to living beings. And obviously that's the animals. And I think everybody has something to say, or an agreement around factory farming and how horrific that is. Unfortunately, it's a product of the amount of meat we consume, like they're in those farms. But it's not even, the impact on the animals is horrific across the board, no matter what kind of way it's produced. But it's not just the animals, the humans involved as well. We go deep on that as well. The people that are in these industries that are performing it, the killing side and daily with these animals having to do things that maybe aren't natural in a human nature sense. And a lot of times it's, immigrants that are barely paid anything, prisoners more than anything, who have history, with violence and things. Probably not the best idea to have them subjected to some of what's going on in there. And so again, I don't want to give too much away or any spoilers, but we definitely go into all sides of literally the ethical questions around it as well.
I love it. I mean, you definitely, I know you didn't expect it with the Spartan guy, but we're very much aligned. Doesn't mean, by the way, that I don't slip, but we're very much aligned. I look forward to the movie. How do people check it out? It'll be on Netflix, I assume. Is it on Netflix?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a big part of this whole story. In 2020, after many years of grueling effort producing this film, like I said, 2-man show, Kip and I going at it, doing all our own research, all our own planning, all our own filming, funding it along the way, a lot. And then we show up to Netflix, who had purchased the film in 2018. They decided to purchase it based off of the success of the previous films. They were excited about this one. And at the time it was called Cowspiritual, as a play on Cowspiracy, the first film. And when we turned in our edit to them, we had gone so deep in certain ways and the angle that we were taking, they even got a little nervous about it. And we went back and forth with them on how to make the film, and even allowed them to make the adjustments that they thought needed to be made. And then when we watched what they produced, we were just not happy, and it didn't feel representative to the message. And so we made the bold decision late 2020, amidst all the craziness that was happening around the world, really tough time, hard time, and made the hardest decision probably I've ever had to make, which was stepping away from that contract. I can't even begin to tell you all the things that led up to that moment, from even before meeting Kip, my journey in my life, and everything culminating in this moment when I was like, oh my gosh, my first film I ever go after, and it's a Netflix film. I was so excited. And in that moment, I had to release that. And we essentially went back to the drawing board, went deeper and harder on the film that we wanted to tell, that we thought was the authentic, integral message. And thus the name change, Christspiracy, because this through line of my backstory with Christianity, but specifically some of the ancient historical information that has been long overlooked, maybe even suppressed, comes out in this film. And now what we're doing is we're launching a Kickstarter, which is going live October 10th. And we're buying our rights back from Netflix. We're the first filmmakers ever to do that, which is massive, even in the sense of the times we're in. We've got the writer's strike going on. Actors are joining it. It may roll into a director's strike, but we're like beating them to the curve. We're, as directors, buying a Netflix original film back from Netflix to make sure that it stays integral. And beyond that, once we went through the drama and the emotions of making that decision, we realized we actually had an opportunity. It became a massive opportunity because Netflix has 3% of the world's population as their subscriber list. Massive, but it's still only 3% of the world's population. This is a worldwide film. We go to India, we go to Nepal, we go to Rome, to the Vatican, we go to all of these places around the world that's going to create interest from everyone around the world. And there's so many places where Netflix doesn't have as much of a presence as it does here in North America. And we want to make sure that those people in those areas, who basically everyone has a smartphone now, and Facebook at least, we want to make sure they have the opportunity to hear about this film and be able to see it regardless of their subscription status, regardless of their financial status. So we're following through in the footsteps of many other films that we've been inspired by that are taking this route and doing a pay it forward method. So we're building our own platform, and we just confirmed the contract isn't inked, but I'll leak one little piece of information here that we're going to be in theaters. So that's a really big one. We don't know the exact details yet, but we're working with some folks that, we really had to go through some back and forth with them, but they are excited about releasing this film in theaters as well. And I'm telling you, this film is going to ignite dialogue in every household. It's one of those films that I really feel has the opportunity to really shake things up, help us all question things that need to be questioned, to reevaluate, to step up, to upgrade in many ways. And I truly hope that everyone gets to see it. But if you are listening to this, please, our Kickstarter is going to be live for 30 days. We may even roll that into an Indiegogo into Christmas time. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, we would be so grateful for the support, because it truly is a David and Goliath story. To bring that biblical reference back in, we are definitely facing the giants of the major streaming platforms that don't want these types of things to succeed.
It's a shame that Netflix couldn't just keep a piece of it and let you run with it and just see what happens.
Yeah, they're awesome. And this is my first long run with them. I did support Seaspiracy. I did some filming for that. I did some music for that as well, because when I came on board for this film, Seaspiracy was still in production. And so some of my skills got pulled into that project and really got to, invest some good time in that. So I did work on that, but Cowspiracy, What the Health before this, Kip, he did those with Keegan Kuhn in a different time. And it truly was a different time. Those films, Cowspiracy, What the Health, they were made completely through the Kickstarter method, Indiegogo method at the time, actually. And they self-funded, self-produced, and then Netflix picked them up as licensing deals. And then luckily, Seaspiracy got picked up as an original as well, right at the time where I feel like some transitions have happened with Netflix. Like, they're a little bit different than they used to be in terms of what they want on screen. So we really hit them in that golden era with those, first films and very little creative control. But now, I don't know if it's the corporate backing and, all the opinions or what's going on. But again, just want to say we're so grateful. The parting was amicable, but we just knew we had to do it. And hopefully when it's all said and done, we made the right decision.
I'm excited. Congrats on a great journey you've leaned into. You've made the tough decisions, held firm to your beliefs. I love it.
Thank
You're
you.
a Stoic.
Appreciate it. I do love Stoicism, and it's a great practice to just take everything and say, in those hard moments, like, again, the Netflix decision, it's going down that pathway. Okay, what's the worst case scenario of what could happen with this decision? Absolute worst case. And you go all the way down to the moment of like, not even having my van. Could I live on the street? Could I this? Could I? And when you realize it and you feel into your own human spirit and what brought you to that point, you're like, well, if I end up there, I'm going to get myself out of that too. Like I've seen it happen time and time again. So it's definitely a good way to live for sure.
Well, see you at a race. Shoot me an email, joe@spartan.com. Thanks for coming on. You're awesome. The movie's going to be a big hit. Everybody needs to go fund the completion of that contract.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.
Today's episode of The Hard Way with Joe De Sena is sponsored by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer, and the official non-alcoholic beer of Spartan. Now you can drink great tasting brews all night long and wake up race ready without the hangover. Athletic is the most decorated non-alcoholic brewer in the world with over 70 awards for its wide selection of IPAs, Goldens, light brews, and more. Athletic Brewing's near beers are fit for all times, which means you can drink them anytime, anywhere. From now until December 31st, new Athletic customers can receive 20% off their first order of $50 or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code HARDWAY at checkout. That's HARDWAY, all one word, for 20% off your first order of TWO 6-packs or more at athleticbrewing.com.